The final topic we'll look at in this lecture is the North Atlantic Treaty Organization, NATO. NATO is the world's largest, strongest military organization, and NATO has played an increasing role in world affairs apart from the member states who created the organization. Now, the purpose of NATO was organized in 1949. It was a Cold War effort designed to provide security against the Soviet Union. Within a short time period after the end of World War II, the public enemy, put that in quotes, became the Soviet Union. In 1949, the Western Europe plus the United States designed to join together in a military organization to be called the North Atlantic Treaty Organization. And it was designed to resist Soviet expansion. It was designed so that any member attacked by the Soviet Union would then be able to call upon its allies in NATO to assist in the defense. And so NATO took as a given that an attack on one member was the same as an attack on all members. Now, NATO was originally designed to serve three different purposes. First of all, stopping Soviet expansion, preventing the spread of communism. Also, to prevent the revival of the nationalist sort of militism that we saw in Europe prior to World War II, to prevent the growth of fascist movements, and in doing so, in large part, by keeping a strong United States presence in Western Europe. And finally, encouraging European political integration by providing for this collective security umbrella. This would theoretically permit Europeans to engage in more political cooperation. Obviously, Europe had not done this much before World War II. So this was part of the goals of NATO. Now, NATO was originally a defense organization, and today you still often hear of it described as a defense organization. But in fact, in recent years, NATO has been much more of an offensive role. They have taken an offensive role. NATO has been used in large part to pursue these objectives of humanitarian war. Remember in the first lecture we mentioned humanitarian war as being now an instrument of foreign policy. And what better way to engage in war than not actually participating, but participating through a proxy called the North Atlantic Treaty Organization. So NATO, this defense organization, was at a bit of a loss following the collapse of the Soviet Union in the early 1990s. And many predicted that NATO would dissolve, eventually fall apart, because it had no role. It had been created to stop the Soviet Union, and the Soviet Union had been stopped forever. But many leaders thought the organization was too valuable to give it up, and so they recreated NATO as an offensive force. And it fought its first war in Bosnia and Serbia in 1999. It led large-scale bombing attacks on Serbia and Bosnia, intervening in the Bosnian Civil War on behalf of Bosnian Muslims and against Christian Serbs. And many consider that a success. It definitely achieved the goal that it wanted in terms of freeing Bosnia and eventually permitting Kosovo to declare its independence. NATO was again used in an offensive capacity in Afghanistan, beginning in 2006. NATO took the lead role in Afghanistan operations. So Afghanistan military operations are actually subject to NATO control. And we saw it again in 2011 when the Germans and French and Americans opted to wage an offensive campaign against Libya to remove Muammar Gaddafi as the head of state, and NATO took the lead role in bombing Libya and eventually ending Gaddafi's rule and then opening up Libya to what it is today. What is the future for NATO? My guess is that it continues in much the same pattern as before. In fact, I predict it will take on an even larger role in world affairs. NATO has now expanded to include former Soviet bloc countries, those areas of Eastern Europe that once were close allies of the Soviet Union are now members of NATO. NATO is conducting exercises in places like Romania and Poland and so on. We'll also see an increasing use of military force by NATO. This notion of NATO as a defense organization probably going to further fade away in the years to come. NATO has already established itself as an offensive force and is unlikely to return to its strictly defensive role. So that's NATO, and that's it for this lecture. Thanks.